the amount of time you've been in the job is really not the biggest factor. Well, the fact of the matter is that people are not interested in your success. They're interested in theirs. Is a way of fighting that is based on gaining and exploiting an advantage. We don't need to totally catch our enemy off guard. We just need to present them with a situation with which they have little time or inadequate time to react. Because it's too easy to get consumed in what you need to do in-house. You need to look external. Leaders who can deal with the fog and friction that conflict brings, the competition brings, and aren't afraid to make the decisions because they have leaders above them who support them. If you have multiple levels of leadership doing that, that's what I define as micromanagement. Whereas what you really need, and this is part of what we call shaping the action, is the higher or the more senior you get in leadership, the further out you should look, which is really what you're doing is you're laying the groundwork for future action. And think about that as it pertains to what's more valuable, a leader doing that or a leader that's down there watching how people are doing things on a daily basis. We don't want reckless decision-making, but in general, faster decision-making is more likely to give you an advantage. You have to have enough forethought to outline the guidance they need to execute. A neat part of this, part of the book, is that the why or the purpose of an operation, or you might say the why of your organization and execution, is dominant to the what. Chapter 4, Warfighting, Conduct of War. The fourth and final chapter of the book with the most interesting concepts. We're going to talk about the way the Marine Corps fights, maneuver warfare. You'll find these principles applicable to business or life in general. Anytime you find yourself in a time-competitive environment with uncertainty and changing situations. Hi, I'm Mike Targus, founder of Center-Desk Leadership Coaching, retired Marine infantry officer. This is the first book consisting of 4 videos laying out Marine Corps doctrine, or the concepts of what it means to be a Marine and how the Marine Corps fights and wins wars. I know that they'll help anyone develop a better tactical mind and help you develop strategy. But you might ask yourself, why bother with tactics and strategy? Well, the fact of the matter is that people are not interested in your success. They're interested in theirs. And your competition, maybe it's another company or maybe it's a jealous coworker, will take what's yours if given the chance, unless you know how to outmaneuver them. So enjoy this video and share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Chapter 4 begins with a quote from Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Now an army may be likened to water, for just as flowing water avoids the heights and hastens to the lowlands, so an army avoids strength and strikes weakness. That quote for me has really resonated over the years, and I've read a lot of books and heard a lot of quotes, but that one, if you can just picture the water flowing down and avoiding strength, that's the whole basis of what the Marine Corps calls maneuver warfare. And maneuver doesn't apply only to space. Maneuver warfare is a way of fighting that is based on gaining and exploiting an advantage. And in addition to spatial, you can have an advantage psychologically, technologically, or temporal, or in time, in addition to spatial. By definition, maneuver warfare is a warfighting philosophy that seeks to shatter the enemy's cohesion through a variety of rapid, focused, and unexpected actions, which create a turbulent and rapidly deteriorating situation with which the enemy cannot cope. Central to this concept, or this way of fighting wars, is the requirement to get inside the enemy's mind and present them with a hopeless situation, one that they can't win, rather than the incremental destruction of all their parts. And sometimes we think to win, we need to destroy our enemy or our opponent entirely. Not true. One way we do this is by concentration. In warfare, you want to concentrate your firepower. And what we do is we bring all our fires to bear at the decisive points. And if you remember from the previous videos, decisive points or decisive actions are those which lead to a goal larger than itself. For example, we don't fight just to destroy an enemy unit. Destroying that enemy unit allows us to do something else, like move down a corridor, or it disables them in a way larger than just the loss of that unit itself. In other words, we're not just reducing the enemy's physical strength. We're taking away big capabilities with decisive actions. For example, a Marine unit with limited air support might strike an enemy communications area shortly before landing an amphibious force so that the enemy is not able to coordinate a defense. Or in a business with limited sales teams, you might concentrate those teams on your largest accounts for a period of time to maximize purchases. And speed is usually linked to a decisive action because that's the reason you're employing speed. Another example of a decisive point might be the enemy's logistics area, where if you destroy that, they're unable to sustain themselves. Or in a business, you might allocate your engineering resources to complete a project, enabling you to focus on bigger and more profitable opportunities during a period of time. The benefit is not simply completing that project, it's all the other opportunities beyond it. Surprise is also central to maneuver warfare, and surprise need not be complete and total surprise, meaning we don't need to totally catch our enemy off guard. We just need to present them with a situation with which they have little time or inadequate time to react. For example, the Marines conduct a helicopter assault 20 kilometers away from the large group of fighters. Maybe they're disrupting the supply lines, but then they leave in those same helicopters. They come back to pick them up before the enemy fighters can react and defend that area. Or your supply chain bulk buys a particular component or product in anticipation of a sales campaign, and you're able to provide engineered or configured products to your customers, but your competition is not able to because they didn't think to bulk buy that same component. They can see that you've done it, but they just can't react. That's surprise. And this is similar to having an external focus, or maybe a focus on your opposition, competition, or even a focus on your client, even though they're not your enemy. And what you want to do when you're orienting on your enemy is you want to see them as a system. The way the book describes it is you want to understand their unique parts. So, for example, the Marines and coalition forces in Afghanistan knew that the Taliban, the insurgent forces, used to use push-to-talk radios to communicate, which were uncovered, or meaning they're not encrypted. Anybody with a scanner can hear them. So you use your signals intelligence assets to listen in, find out what they're doing, and counter it. Or maybe you have a situation in your business where your competition is weak and fails to follow up on customers or potential customers. So you find ways of being proactive with reaching out, and you're drawing a distinction between you and your competition, maybe without visiting them at all. But the point is, you're taking one piece of what your customer's thought process is, you're concentrating on that and doing it better than your competition, following up. And this is another way of saying that you're going to determine your enemy's center of gravity and attack it through a critical vulnerability. If you remember from the last video, the center of gravity is really that heartbeat, or, what the glue that holds the enemy together. And it may, in most cases, it's heavily defended, but what we seek to do are identify the vulnerabilities, and in particular, a critical vulnerability that leads right to the heart of the enemy. Shown in this slide here is a metaphor for that. A little bit of a graphic example, but you get the picture. In Marine units, you have an intelligence section. Starting at the battalion level, you have an S2 all the way up through larger or joint commands, but you have people that are dedicated to what we talked about last time, is turning the map around and looking at things from your competition or the enemy's point of view. You may not be able to stand up a permanent cell like that. You want to be able to identify people who can look at things through your opposition or your client's point of view, because it's too easy to get consumed in what you need to do in-house. You need to look external. Next, we develop a philosophy of command, or a concept of how we fight, or figure out the way we support the way we need to fight. And central to our philosophy of command and maneuver warfare is we want to generate a tempo that our enemy cannot sustain, and gives us a almost perpetual advantage because we are trained and able to do this. We can deal with the fluid situations of combat, and we have decentralized command and control, which, by the way, requires very talented leaders all through the organization. Leaders who can deal with the fog and friction that conflict brings or competition brings, and aren't afraid to make the decisions because they have leaders above them who support that. So we generate a high operational tempo, which is more than speed. It's just our general ability to operate faster than our competition. A Marine commander might use an operations order to organize the information and communicate it to their unit to tell them what needs to be done and why, in addition to laying out the general situation of what we're up against and all the coordinating instructions and things that need to be conveyed to support the operation as a whole. I'll do another video on that, the 5-paragraph order. Or in your business, you might look at your weekly, monthly, or quarterly reporting requirements and appreciate how much time it takes to put those together, and compare that to how much you actually use them. Certainly the things that you use rarely, you want to try to slim those down. But you want to have an appreciation overall. If you expect somebody to focus externally on the competition or your clients, you want to weigh the amount of time that they spend on internal requirements against that. And maneuver warfare would say you want to have them externally focus as much as possible. So you, as the leader, as the commander, you need to take a look at the information that you need to make a decision. And it may seem easy to go overboard and get people in the rhythm of preparing those reports, but the bottom line is that it takes valuable time away where they could be doing something else, either focusing externally on their clients or supporting somebody who is. And the leaders and managers in your organization have to be able to deal with uncertainty. And the way that you do that is you, as their supervisor, you need to make known the expectation for them to do that in the first place. But then when mistakes happen, you have to be measured in your response, because mistakes are going to happen. And if you have a zero defect mentality, they're not going to take those chances. They're not going to take those measured risks to really move the organization forward. And your tempo is not going to increase. It's going to decrease. And that's decentralizing command and control. It would be seen as the opposite of micromanagement. But can you really rely on your people, your individual contributors, those supervisors, frontline managers, and maybe even your middle managers, depending on what level you're at, to take care of business within the guidance on a daily basis? Or do you feel the need to be involved in the details? Sometimes you need to be involved in the details, but that's not the plan. That should not be the way you operate routinely. If there's an emergency, if there's an urgent requirement, yes, everybody, and I'll talk about that too, where the commander needs to go to the point on the battlefield where they have the most influence. But on a daily basis, you have to try to be as decentralized as possible. Another way of saying it is people can react to situations without asking permission. If you look at this picture here of this Marine, part of a squad moving through, it's probably Afghanistan. Who knows better than how to handle the situation than the people you see on the screen right there? It's not a commander in a command post 5 miles away. It's not somebody even further than that. They have no real appreciation for what it's like on the ground. If you look at that picture, a million things can happen. And the person who knows best what can happen is the corporal or the sergeant that's leading that squad right there. So can we find a way to back our people up in the same way? How would a commander 5 miles away be able to influence that? We have technology that enables them to do that. We have radios, satellite communications, drones. But the point is, you want to use those things to support good command and control. You want to be able to support that sergeant in that picture that I just showed with the ability to make that decision, look around the corner, support them if they need it. You don't want to use it to look over his shoulder. One key to decentralized command and control, or think of it as decentralized execution, is implicit understanding or implicit communication. Implicit communication is when we can anticipate the people around us that are supporting us, leading us, or that we lead. And we all have a common frame of reference on what needs to be done, but more importantly, why. And what this enables us to do is operate without explicit instructions. And you've been in those situations where you had a supervisor who really felt the need to give you those explicit instructions and maybe even held you up until they could give them to you. This is the opposite we're talking. And it requires two other things: familiarity and trust. So team building exercises or collaboration themed work environments. You got to be real careful when you talk about remote workers, because this is a lot more challenging to be able to do, but people need to become as familiar as possible on a professional level, and they need to learn to trust each other in certain ways. And, you know, your job as a leader, if there are people on the team who can't be trusted, they can't continue to be part of the team if you want to operate like this. And the second one is, I alluded to a little earlier, but the leader needs to be up front. You got to lead from the front, but that doesn't mean you're looking over people's shoulder. Like I said, you're at the point of action. Better than looking over somebody's shoulder and doing something for them, perhaps, which is probably the worst, is you understand the situation personally. And what that means to be up front with them or be at the front is you understand that situation and you're able to support them. And support could come in a lot of different ways. It's not just solving the work problem, but it's encouraging people. And it's encouraging people to develop for the future and take on more responsibility. Again, just building that organization and giving you more capability to deal with these uncertain environments. Shaping action, or shaping the action. Something that senior leaders do or should do, because they're not micromanaging and looking over people's shoulder every day, is they're thinking about the future. And I have a sketch here that I'll pull up, but The way I personally like to think of micromanagement is if everybody at different levels in the organization is all worried about the same time horizon, just say all the time. I hate to speak in absolutes, but more times than not, thinking about what's going on this week. If you have multiple levels of leadership doing that, that's what I define as micromanagement. Whereas what you really need, and this is part of what we call shaping the action, is the higher or the more senior you get in leadership, the further out you should look, which is what I'm trying to show on this sketch right here. So your CEO is looking way out. They're looking at the overall health of the organization, or they may even be thinking about transitioning the organization to somebody else as their sole focus, but they're looking way out. They may be managing stock holders, investors, that kind of thing, just to make it possible for the rest of the organization to do what they need to do. And the further down you go, you have the executive leadership team, vice presidents, directors. All of those levels of management and leadership should be focused on making it more easily, making the operating environment easier for the next level below them. And the key to do this, and this is a Marine Corps ism, is while you're doing that, you still want to have the perspective of what the Marines would say, the rifleman's perspective, or the grunt on the ground. What are they seeing? What are they going through? And all levels of the organization use that to guide how they lead and plan and shape action in an organization. Doesn't mean you're down there making things better for them personally all the time. It just means you're making your decisions, maybe even at a high level, with them in mind. So shaping is changing the situation to our advantage in time and space on the battlefield. But it could be, in addition to that, it could be some other considerations in your business. An example of shaping for a Marine battalion might be to attack an enemy in an area on their flank to push them into an open area where they then are vulnerable to air support or another unit. Another example in a business might be your business development lead is making calls on the leaders of the most profitable accounts that you sell to. And they have, as part of their agenda, promoting products and services that are not only more profitable for the business to provide, but maybe even easier. So you end up with a product that you are promoting in business development. You get people's interests up. The sales team can then go sell that product a little bit more easily and in more quantity. And your engineering team has to work less. Your project managers can more easily manage the project, and your ops team is able to deliver it. Maybe they have it in stock. That might be one reason, but that's an example of shaping where in this case, that business development leader knew what would make it easier for the rest of the organization and more profitable. And that's their focus. And the purpose of shaping in the end is that you are able to gain the initiative. And really what you're doing is you're laying the groundwork for future action. And think about that as it pertains to what's more valuable, a leader doing that or a leader that's down there watching how people are doing things on a daily basis. The final aspect of shaping is the way you do it allows you different options as well. Decision making, which may be the heart of the whole maneuver warfare idea in the first place. The book says it like this: all action is a result of making decisions or not making decisions. And the point here is that not making a decision should not be viewed as a safe alternative, which a lot of people do. But it may help your career, but it's not going to help the team. It's not going to help the organization. And we have to remember that decisions are not made in what we call a vacuum or against an inanimate competitor. Your competition is trying to outsell you, outperform you, and your enemy is trying to kill you. They're trying to stay alive at your expense. So how much time do you need to make a decision? In this sketch here, this is from one of my favorite books, Command and War by Martin Van Creveld. You can see where, and this is just a summary of the concept, but if you're able to make a decision with less information, then it's going to take you less time, and that's what point A represents. The point in the middle represents, maybe let's call that our competitor, and then the point in the top right represents a inefficient or maybe a very micromanage or top-heavy decision-making process. The point is that our competitor is in the middle. It is possible for us to make decisions faster if we lower our information requirements. But if we're just constantly in pursuit of information and we just can't deal with risk, it's just going to take too long, and they're going to decide, they're going to change the situation on us, and any decision we make will be overcome by events. We don't want reckless decision making, but in general, faster decision making is more likely to give you an advantage. So leaders and commanders, what they do is they learn over the years to balance that risk of saying, I have enough information to make a decision and actually making it. So, how do we make decisions faster in the team? One of the things is clear roles and responsibilities. And if you've ever been in an organization where they're not clear, it just takes longer to get things done. And people step on each other and they get in each other's way. You have two people doing the same task where you only need one. And on the other hand, you have nobody working on something that needs to be done. Clearing up roles and responsibilities should never be overlooked in importance. As far as the decision making itself, you have two models that the book talks about is recognitional and analytical. Analytical would equate to almost an excessive, I was going to say endless, but excessive collection of data. And you do want to be data driven, but you want your systems to be able to support, getting back to over-reliance on technology. This is one way that technology can support the decision maker, providing you with the right data at the right time. But the data itself is not going to tell you the answer. And recognitional, think of this as the really experienced leader that's been around. They've read a lot of books, they've experienced a lot of situations, and it's really a combination of the two. So, for example, can you use recognitional decision-making as a new manager or a new leader? You can in a way if you've really studied and prepared yourself, but you also want to be humble and know that you haven't learned everything. So there is a little bit of a balance there. And it's also possible to be a senior manager or a senior leader, but not able to make recognitional decisions at all because you're just so close-minded. You haven't continued to educate yourself and you don't listen to people. So the amount of time you've been in the job is really not the biggest factor. And then we must realize that all decisions are unique in some way. There's no cookie cutter approach. And I have an engineering background and you're always on the quest to standardize things. But it's important to realize that even though you do have standards, those standards are going to be used in concert with a custom configuration or at the very least a unique customer or client situation. And if you read any military history at all, you're familiar with the Patton quote, "A good plan executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week," George S. Patton. Mission tactics, this is something in the Marine Corps that really places an emphasis on telling your people the purpose of the operation, why it needs to happen, and leaving how they execute the operation up to them. And that's a generalization, but that's kind of what I talked about with regard to micromanagement as well. An example might be a Marine rifle company is tasked with disrupting enemy supply lines. So the company commander brings the platoon commanders and squad leaders in and briefs the operation. But it's impossible for that company commander to tell the squad leader and every squad leader in the company exactly what checkpoints to establish, when to link up, what kind of equipment they need to have down to the individual level. Sometimes that's a little bit prescriptive, but not a lot of times it's not. What size units to infiltrate by. These are things that if you try to control them at a higher level, what they do is they end up restricting the executor. Or maybe you have a field service leader in your organization. You have a new technology that enables you to monitor customer usage data, but your field techs are the ones that are going to install and monitor the system. That field service director is going to say what we need and why, and then the techs are going to figure out how to get those systems installed. They're going to be out there with the customers. They're going to learn really about the data that's going into them. They're going to be able to identify problems. But the director is not going to be able to uncover that level of detail across the board. So they're going to give mission tactics or decentralized orders to their techs to do that. And it's not necessarily less work to do that, but you have to have highly capable people to do it. You have to have enough forethought to outline the guidance they need to execute. And an SOP might, in that example there, might be the way that the equipment is stored, checked out, maintained. It may be how you receive the equipment. Is it FedExed over to you the night before? Things like that, or who to contact to get that equipment. Right there's about 5 or 6 details that you don't have to explain if you have an SOP. And what SOPs do is they enable the more senior leaders to look further out and shape that action. And this part of the book really is interesting as it talks about when you operate this way or you execute with mission tactics, it's really a contract between the leaders and the people doing the work, and it has to go both ways. On one hand, the leader has to trust that their people are going to execute within the guidance, and that's the one that's probably more familiar to people, or people think of things more like that. But really, the person that's executing needs a commitment from their leader as well, so that they give them the right guidance and support and they're not wasting time, money, and they're not sending them down a path of getting the wrong result in the first place. And one of the ways you do that is you know about the larger situation that the leaders in the organization are dealing with. You might know why that this technology was fielded, and you might understand the leadership might spend a lot of time explaining the benefit that it's going to give the organization. So you don't just use it at face value. You can use it in a way that supports what the larger organization is trying to do. Marine Corps calls this understanding the situation 2 levels up. And this is one of the ways that you get harmonious execution, but also decentralized execution when people understand what's going on in a larger organization, which is called commander's intent in warfighting. But the commander's intent is that leader or that commander's personal expression of the purpose of the operation or the execution that lay ahead. You want to achieve harmonious execution, not random. So here's how it might sound in a Marine unit. At 0500, we'll seize objective A in order to block the enemy's egress route or escape route. We know it's important not to let the enemy leave the area. Maybe it's not possible to block their route, but if we can fix them in place or hold them by engaging them directly, we can execute the operation. A business example might be something like this. In Q4, we want to surge production by 30% to accelerate revenue. We're looking for additional revenue, so there are other ways to achieve that. Shipping products early, completing engineering, and generally executing ahead of schedule. So in that example, if we encounter a roadblock in our manufacturing that maybe we're not able to achieve a 30% increase, there's other things that the team can do. And you give them an idea of what those can be. Again, it won't be maybe overly prescriptive, but if you understand how you accelerate revenue, then your leaders at all levels can look at their particular situations and implement them to do the same thing without that 30% increase. A neat part of the book is that the why or the purpose of an operation, or you might say the why of your organization and execution, is dominant to the what, because the what can become overcome by events, but most likely your overarching purpose is not going to change. And then part of that commander's intent, you have a concept of the operation, and that's some of the details where you're going to assign tasks to your different units. And that is a little bit more prescriptive, but it falls under the intent or the purpose. And a good way to look at decentralization or what needs to be decentralized and what really does need to come from the top is top-down planning and bottom-up refinement, meaning you always need guidance coming from the top. You want to know what's important to the organization and to the leaders, but then the exact how or the refinements based on the situations people are encountering, that comes from the bottom up. Another way that we achieve this unity of effort or this, everybody pulling in the same direction is called the main effort. And the main effort has to do with who in our organization should get the most support at this point in time. And it can shift, but you think of it in terms of supported and supporting. So for example, in the Marine Corps, an infantry battalion might secure an area so that a logistics unit can come in and provide disaster relief. In this case, the logistics unit is the main effort, and that infantry battalion is securing the area. So they're supporting the logistics unit, supported and supporting. Or you might have a business example in Q3, you have inventory levels that are too high in a particular product. So your sales team proactively goes out and tries to sell that product to support the financial implications of having too much inventory and moving the inventory out of your factory. So the factory in that example is supported. And everybody in the organization is thinking about, how can I support the main effort? And of course, they need to know who is the main effort in the first place. The main effort, last thing on that is it's not going to remain the same permanently. So you're going to change the main effort. And to use that Marine example, the Marine Infantry Battalion that is that's a ground combat force. They're going to secure the area for the disaster relief. Once that disaster relief is over and the logistics unit leaves, that infantry battalion might become the main effort to maybe continue an operation into a certain area, or they may just come out of there, in which case an aviation unit would come in and maybe support them. So that would be that relationship. The concept of surfaces and gaps, and I put this on the sketch back, if you noticed, with the skeleton and the heart. Surface is a hard point, and a gap is a weakness. It's another way. It's not the same thing as a vulnerability, but the way we come into using the term surfaces and gaps is you avoid the surfaces. Think back again to the Sun Tzu quote. You avoid the rocks, you flow downward, you avoid the highlands, and then you seek the the gaps, or the water flows through the gaps. So we always want looking for the gaps, which isn't always how we think. We think we need to counter strength on strength, and that really gives us the least advantage if that's all we're doing. Sometimes you have to, but generally you want to try to avoid those surfaces or those heavily defended or strong points from your competition. This is one idea, surfaces and gaps, that I think more than a lot of the other ones, you want to really ingrain into your thought process. And you want to look at your competition in terms of where they're strong and where they're weak. And you want to adjust your decision-making to direct your resources and your attention toward the weaknesses, not the strengths. In the Marine Corps, the last topic here is combined arms. The Marine Corps fights with what's called combined arms, and you take different aspects of the units and you combine, or you use all elements to complement each other. So, one example here might be you have a Marine squad, about 13 people moving down an alley. They think in that alley that they're going to think back to that Marine picture I was showing you. It might look like that. They're going to move down that alley. They know there's enemy in the area. They might make contact. So they're going to put a machine gun team up on the roof before they walk down the alley, and they're going to have a sniper with them. So what you're doing there is they start to move through, you have people up high that can see from a different perspective. They might be able to see the enemy before that squad on the street, engage them, keep their heads down. Maybe the sniper is able to isolate the area for people coming to reinforce the enemy. And then while they're doing that, say where the machine gun is suppressing, then the squad continues to move while their head is down. They are fixed. They can't get out of that situation. And pretty soon that squad is right up on top of them. So that's an example, a really tactical example of combined arms. Another one, which I've kind of used already, but is your business development team uses their client or their potential client contact in a way that is going to make things easier, that the sales team has an easier time selling, your operations team has an easier time making or distributing through the supply chain. And then on top of that, the leaders of the organization are attending trade shows talking about the same thing. So everybody's supporting each other. So in conclusion, for warfighting as a whole, we want to think of warfighting and maneuver warfare not as formulaic, which a lot of times we do at work, is we try to boil everything down to discrete chunks of information that tell us yes or no. And while we should be data-driven, we should collect data to help us make those decisions, it's important to realize that we rarely are going to encounter the same decision twice, particularly as you start to become more of a senior leader. And this mentality, this maneuver warfare mentality, shapes every decision that we make in some way, from how we recruit people to how we train them, what we expect out of them on a daily basis, how we develop them for management and senior leadership positions, and how we interact with our clients, how we shape action for the future. So here's a list. We're going to quickly review the concepts in the book of Warfighting as a whole. Remember that the nature of war, which is unchanging, is a struggle of two hostile, independent wills. So whether it's an enemy or our competition, neither of them is waiting for us to do what we need to do. They're trying to stay alive at our expense. And also, this nature of war is heavily influenced by human factors. So the people that we have on our team, the people that the competition has on their team, the enemy that we're fighting is central. So a focus on people is paramount. Maneuver warfare, the core concept, the core operational fighting concept of the Marine Corps, based on gaining and maintaining an advantage and exploiting it. Commander's intent, that personal expression from the leader on how they see the operation and why it's important and what it's trying to achieve. The purpose of the operation, which allows the sub-elements to make decisions on their own and in harmonious execution with the intent. Decisive actions that we take that have results larger than the action themselves, and a lot of times lead to victory. Unity of command or unity of effort, everybody with the same objective in mind, the same purpose, and able to execute without being told, implicit communication, and achieve the same goal. Economy of force, this is either using our resources sparingly or concentrating our forces at the decisive point. It's kind of the opposite of the peanut butter spread of resources. Use them where they're most important and with the most impact. Our ability to change direction or react to situations quickly and as they arise. And across all of these concepts is the human dimension. The leadership and morale training of the people that we lead or the people that are in our organization with us. You can't very well execute any of these principles without great people and great leaders. I hope this was a good primer, a good outline for you to think about how you can develop yourself or develop people in your team. Watch it, discuss it. You might even want to get a hold of the book Warfighting. There's plenty in that book that I didn't cover in these videos. But if I can help bring this thought process into your organization or to you personally to understand it better, my information's in the profile. I'd love to help. Thanks.